All right, Mr. Bernstein, take it away. You're on mute, Mark. You're still on mute.
There we go. It is now unmutedly Sunday, November 24th, and it's Tinderbox Meetup with Michael Becker. I'm Mark Bernstein, the designer of Tinderbox, and here's Michael Becker.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to today's session. As is our typical format, we go around the room and we ask new people to introduce themselves. Don't see anybody new. We provide any industry announcements or updates. We also then will dig into any issues, topics people are working on within their files, and if we have a theme, we jump into the theme. Today we don't have a theme formally, but there is several things that have popped up around the community the last week or so. One in particular, which I think Win raised, which it might be fun to discuss, would be, what do people do with Tinderbox and how do they learn how to use it? And that in particular, I think would be an interesting dialogue to kick into, particularly because I've been working for the last 3 weeks now with Kim, Bruce, and Paul on a Tinderbox, or I've been delivering a Tinderbox 101 course for those three, and it would be great to kind of pull in some knowledge that we've been gathering from that exercise too, to see, are there improved ways that we can go about as a community helping people grok and grasp this incredible tool that is Tinderbox. Outside of that, if our people are interested, as I have the tendency to do, I have developed quite a few new data modeling techniques this week that have been enormously useful to me. So I'll be happy to share some of that. Looking in the chat. And then Mark's got a globalization of artificial intelligence and digital transformation 10 minutes for us. And I personally would love to see that. If anybody else wants to give a thumbs up, let's go for it. Cool. So let's go with that. So we'll start with Mark.
Now, let's not do that first. Let's do some
All right.
Tinderbox first.
Let's do some Tinderboxing first then. Okay, great. So or Art, we can also go back to your templating discussions. I don't know if you had a chance to look at the meetup from the other week that specifically dove into your topic.
No, it was amazing. But the thing is, I've been traveling. I just got down, and I'm sleeping in snatches of 4 hours, and I'm nuts, So
Yeah.
I've got to about 45 minutes of it. I haven't seen the whole thing yet, but it's so great. And then you basically where I am, you start getting into, separating the templates from, and then being able to just apply any, and just grabbing the stuff from Excel and throwing it into Tinderbox. That was so awesome. And ChatGPT, you're becoming like the maestro of ChatGPT queries, coming up with usable code. Fantastic.
Dude, you have no idea what I was doing this morning. So just as an aside, as I said, one of the projects I had, one of the leading automotive predictive repair intelligence companies has brought me on to do some marketing strategy for them. And I know very little. I know how to drive a car. That's about as much as I understand the automotive industry. So we had a 2-day offsite meeting, and channeling Paul Christy's work, I basically took the 2 PowerPoints that we generated as an executive team, blown it into a Tinderbox file, and then from that have been able to identify about 200 potential client prospects and have analyzed and broke down pretty much most of the aftermarket automotive repair industry. And I was able to do that in about a day and a half with Tinderbox. And you could not do that in any other tool that I'm aware of.
I can imagine.
And then the other thing that I've done this week that was fun that you guys might want to see is I've built out a time tracking utility for tracking my time. So that's kind of fun too. But we can talk about that later.
You've done that before, though, right, Michael? You've done a time tracking.
But this one finally works. I mean, the other one was super comprehensive, but this one's like super easy, and I did it using separators, and it's just trivial, but yet
okay, cool,
very compelling. So we can show that.
Yeah.
But we can go there. Otherwise, we don't need to have me monopolize the conversation. Yeah, Kim, Win, Bruce. You guys want to, and Chuck, we haven't seen you in a while. If you've got stuff to come up. Hi, Dave. What do you guys want to talk about? Nothing? Kim, Bruce, Dave, Win, you're on mute, Win. I mean, I'll happily monopolize the time
So,
if you guys want
Michael,
me
you
to,
didn't
but
see my message that said no quizzes?
no quizzes. Yeah, no, I did not see that. Yes, I will not quiz you.
All right.
Although,
So he gets us up at 6:30 in the morning, at least Los Angeles time, and I somehow try and keep both eyes open, and then he does this roller coaster ride that only Michael can do. And as I worry that my ninth digit is about to lose its grasp on the handles, he slows down and then, of course, wants to know how I'm doing.
No, we have to slow him down. We have to slow him down, actually. Ask more questions, you know?
So anyway, it's actually a wonderful time. And I mean, watching Michael go through this, the one thing that's interesting, if any of you have seen the movie Up, Squirrel, you ask Michael a question about something that's a little bit off track, and you get a master lecture. It's Michael. You are one of a kind, and I am in awe each week. So what have I learned? Number one, I've been learning about organization, an organization in a way that I really didn't appreciate. The on add function and the idea of automatically populating whatever 2 or 3 character prefix that you're using, and how you might use agents to be able to, you decide that you don't like the one you have and you have 40 terms and you want to change them from TRM to TM for some reason. An agent's going to help you do that, but not just an agent, as I've learned. You're probably going to want to do it as a stamp because it's a one-time process. But then if you want it to automatically populate, then you'll use your on add function. How am I doing so far, Michael?
great. I love it.
And
yeah. So it seems like
you've
learned a little bit. So you've learned a little bit about organization and then some of the automation tools, the automation that Tinderbox lets you do. It's what I've heard.
The part that's most challenging for me, which in all fairness, Michael has not fully covered yet, is how to write the code for the agents. That's really, I think, for me, the next step, kind of holy grail. But already, just kind of seeing some of the new attributes that I was unaware of, and how those attributes, how once again, you want to change something. So what is it? Displayed attributes that you can go into.
Yeah.
You can populate from your displayed attributes, as opposed to checking off. You can go to your not prototypes. What's the other one where you do a search, Michael, and then you start checking off the ones that you want? I forgot what the terminology is for that.
Oh, you are using the inspector?
Yeah, that's so. Yeah, from the inspector, but yeah, within the inspector, where do you go?
Oh, to the quick stamp, and so you can use the quick stamp.
I haven't really used quick stamps before, and that's been eye opening. So it definitely that's what I have gotten out of it so far, and so it's. I'm in this to make this work, and it's kind of interesting also thinking about things like how you keep track of versioning. For me, I've got chapters. I've sent some of the chapters out for review, gotten some positive feedback, and at the same time, notes about what I can do to tweak it and make it a little bit better. Well, keeping track of all that is challenging, and so we've talked organizationally about how to do that. So that's what I've got. So
a couple things that came up yesterday too, which I think you seem to appreciate that yesterday was, with Tinderbox, once you understand templates, you really can produce any output you want.
Oh, right.
Whether or not be a table or be a linear document or be a table within a linear document, you have essentially total control.
So can I give a stab at that? As long as I'm making a fool of myself, why not keep going? I used to use a program called Crystal Reports. Absolutely loved Crystal Reports. And what it would do for me is it would allow me to pull in from several different sources and organize. And Michael's whole thing about first you've got your data, then you're organizing your data, you're forming your conclusions, and then, and I know he uses different terms, but then you've got your output. And so the output is really the different templates. And I didn't fully appreciate that before. I would just kind of struggle, get it out in some particular template. And then, to be honest, then I would organize it. No, you don't have to do that. You want certain things to be bullet points, and you create a bullet point template. You want other things to be just straight text, fine. You want to have maybe something else to be in smaller font text, and I'm going to dare say probably indented, although something as simple as indenting, I don't know how to do yet. So you can do those things. One of the questions that I continue to have is, it's fine to get things out in HTML. Some of the challenge becomes when you want to get it out in a word-friendly format. We learned, for example, that the H1 through H5 nomenclature does not really translate very nicely to Microsoft Word, but it does translate very nicely to Google Docs. Google Docs is very happy with the HTML. So learning and playing around with things, I imagine that Pandoc is in my future. And it sounds like that's going to be a way of also helping out with this. So I think I'll
Yeah,
end
and let me
on that note.
Yeah, and let me just to make a couple, prefacerial remarks, and then we can move to Kim because his hand's been up. So
Wait,
one, you
do I
talked
get a
about
grade? No
A
grade?
minus for sure. No, yeah, A minus. You're not the A plus yet, but it was a good A
Oh no,
minus.
Michael, if you had given me an A plus, I would have lost all respect for you.
Yeah, exactly. So, so the you talked about the query code that or excuse me, the code for running agents, and that's referred to as querying. So, and I think that's an important distinction that we can cover at some point, and that I think people often get confused because it looks similar. And we can pull up a Tinderbox file and show this really quick if people are interested in that. But you have the syntax that's used for writing action code, which includes the parentheses and the curly quotes and the semicolons and all of those little core elements that we use for making and the attributes themselves with the dollar sign. So when we write say a piece of action code, we might say $color equals quote red end quote semicolon, and that's the action. That would be action code for making something red. Querying, it can get confusing because it looks similar, but it's different in the sense that, for example, if you're running an agent query and you want to find notes that are red, you would write $color equals red. And so while it looks similar, it's not exactly the same syntax as action code, and that's where I think it gets confusing sometimes. So, for example, in agents, you're not using the semicolons. You're using parentheticals to group elements, and you're using a lot of things like dot contains operators or different kinds of actions like greater than equals to, those kinds of things. So it's similar but different, and I think that's where it can get kind of confusing. And then you brought up Pandocs. Just for those people that may not know, Pandoc is a third-party command line utility that can take in any textual information and output it to any format. And because Tinderbox sits on top of the Mac OS and can then run command line code, you can push your HTML output, JSON output, textual output out of Tinderbox into Pandoc, and out spits the other end Word files, Excel files, PowerPoint files, really kind of whatever you want. So
I have
that's
a
another
question on
really
that,
interesting
Michael, if you
utility.
don't mind.
Sure.
A member who I don't think comes around much anymore started helping me install Pandoc, but rather than just doing a normal installation, he wanted it to be a command line installation. And had that gone well, that would have been good. But it didn't, and we never actually were able to install it. So I might have partial Pandoc somewhere on my computer, and I'm just wondering, if I want to start learning Pandoc, can I just go and grab it, assume that it'll overwrite whatever was already there, and just do a normal installation? Yes, Mark?
You can-ish, because let's just be clear. When you say normal installation, I think what you're referring to is like the WYSIWYG UI that a typical application will use to install. Pandoc's not installed that way. Pandoc is a command line application with no front end UI. And so there are, and you and I can do this next week if you want. We can hop online and I'll get it installed for you. But it's pretty simple. You can use tools like Homebrew or just install Pandoc directly from the command line. But if you're not familiar with doing that, it can be a bit nerve-wracking because you're like, am I going to blow up my computer? So it's pretty easily managed.
Thanks.
Yeah, it's another one of those things that just require familiarity. And then the one comment I wanted to make too, when Bruce was referring to Tinderbox's ease of use with, say, Word versus Chrome, what he was referring to was, if let's say you've produced an output in Tinderbox, you've created a template and you're looking at that output in preview. If you and let's say you've used like the typical heading 1, heading 2, heading 3 HTML syntax for formatting your headings. If you copy that, if you hit a Command A and you copy that preview and paste that into a Google Chrome document, Google Chrome will read the HTML natively and represent your headings perfectly. If you do that in a Word document, Word will not. And that's not a Tinderbox fault. That's not the fault of Tinderbox. That's because Word is 20-year-old code that just it can get really, really messy. And so when you're pasting into a Word document, Word is unable to realize that you're pasting a Word document and therefore, or excuse me, HTML material, and then it's unable to transcribe like Chrome can the heading tags coming out of HTML and then use those in the native Word format. As an aside to that, I have found, it took me almost 9 months to find it, but I found a post by one guy who said if you pass in through Pandoc these custom tags, you can get Word to recognize your HTML tags, and I can demonstrate how to do that at some future time. But let's go back to so there's a lot. Thank you for Bruce. That was a good readout. Kim and then Dave.
Yeah, I was just going to say with the class, it's kind of like looking at the parts of a system being Tinderbox, and then the actual system thinking concept, where you're really kind of looking at all the parts of the system and breaking them down to really understand what Tinderbox can do. So I'm looking at that type of metaphor, understanding the parts, but also you have to get into it to actually to look at what are the parts that you can actually get into. And so the discovery part of it is actually a really terrific in terms of what you're doing, Michael. And so I'm looking into Pandoc, trying to get some more output happening, templates, and but pretty much Bruce kind of encapsulated what was going on with the class, and it's just really great. And trying to get on some sort of level of expertise from a macro level, but the micro level, looking at the actual pieces of the actual system, that's where you actually get the more value out of Tinderbox. I do believe it's just learning what you can do with it, and then from there, you can actually discover what you want to do with a big project, right? But I just want to share that.
And thank you for that. And my favorite quote yesterday from Paul Christy was, "Tinderbox is where the real work gets done." So you can use collection tools like Drafts and Obsidian and other collection utilities, which are great because you can do them on the fly. But if you really want to roll up your sleeves and get the work done, like I was talking about with the automotive project I was doing earlier this week, I have no idea how would I've done that with any other tool other than Tinderbox. I mean, it saved me. I would argue easily 5 or 6 days. I was able to get done in a day and a half worth of work. Dave.
Oh, it's nice to finally join one of these meetings and put faces to all the names in the forum. I just wanted to say, it just sounds like everyone's trying to do things the most difficult way possible as a way of salting the earth before I start talking about what I'm doing. And I'm doing something I think I'm basically using Tinderbox wrong. I like to use tools the wrong way. I don't know if that's a particularly long-term strategy, but this is where I am. So I'm
Dave, on that point though, there is no right or wrong way. Tinderbox is like going to Home Depot. It's this giant toolbox of text management capabilities and tools, and you want to use a screwdriver to hammer in a nail, you can. It's just there's really no right or wrong way. And as we find often in the community, there's 5 or 6 different ways to get a thing done. It just depends on the way your mind works and the way your workflow works. And there's a whole bunch of different paths to get to similar solutions.
It's very diplomatic of you, Michael. There was a,
But it's true, which is great.
yeah. There was a line, isn't it? So what I'm doing basically, I'm at the minute I'm writing up my my PhD thesis. So I've got the
Yeah.
80,000 words set ahead of me. And what I kind of, it's changed obviously as these things horribly do. So I kind of started out with a particular set of kind of models of data in Tinderbox a very long time ago now, and I've turned from what was practice-based bit of research into something that's entirely theoretical and written now. So I thought I'd mention this a couple of times in a forum. I kind of dangled it, but I've been using this weird mix of Tinderbox in outlining mode, talking to DEVONthink as a data storage system. One of the nice things about that, I'm going to pull the props out here, is I'm working entirely in Markdown, and everyone's talking about kind of the Markdown and Appendocs. But there was a couple of things that's really nice. So picked one of these devices up a couple of months ago. It's an amazing little thing. There we go, pop on.
What? I'm sorry.
So,
What is
yeah,
that?
it's a King Jim Primera. It's kind of got very little branding. They're only available in Japan. I think they're doing a US-based Kickstarter, but you can pick them up for about 300 British pounds, which would be about, I think, $500-ish, $400 to $500. But the thing about it is basically it's instant on. It's just a plain text editor. It does nothing other than edit text. It's got five dictionaries built in, and all of them are in Japanese. So you can't even spell check. It's amazing. But it means you can stick an SD card into it, and it just works with plain text documents. And it's really nice as a distraction. Really nice distraction for you. Right? Feels a little bit like the Scion 5s used to feel like, if anyone used to dabble with those. But what's really nice is because I've got this stuff stored as kind of fragments of text in DEVONthink. DEVONthink has got this nice feature where it stores, everyone knows DEVONthink, well, I don't need to step back and talk about DEVONthink. But one of the nice things that DEVONthink does is it allows you to have two ways of storing files within it. So you can either put stuff into its own crazy database mechanism system where you're never entirely sure where they are on disk, or you can have a thing where it calls it indexing. So you can point it to a directory in the Finder and say, import this into your DEVONthink database. And every single item, every single file it pulls in gets a unique URL and ID field, which means with a little bit of AppleScript is you can map between, you can put a data attribute of you can take the URL of an item in Tinderbox and paste the URL of the item in DEVONthink and create a mapping between the two things. But it also means that you can take that directory of files that are just stored on the in the Finder and stick them in an SD card and open them up in like your crazy Primera text editor. Or you can, the other thing that's really nice is DEVONthink will index that stuff and it will make it available as a database that gets shared across devices. So they've got mobile editors for DEVONthink. So you can basically take your entire text base that you're working on in Tinderbox as pieces and then work on those separately in external tools and have them, when you copy them back to your Mac, you can have that kind of get auto fetched and auto updated in your master document in Tinderbox, which is I found quite a nice way of working. But at the minute, what I'm doing is I'm faffing around, probably creating a needless amounts of busy work for myself of being able to break down kind of chunks into smaller chunks and then automatically manage the creation of new elements on the DEVONthink side that mapped back onto the Tinderbox side. So it's kind of, I'm always using the outliner in Tinderbox, but each element in the outline is an external file on disk that it updates and works through. But it's quite cute because you can stick with Markdown the entire way. And it was a feature I begged Mark Berstein for a long time ago, which was to be able to see multiple nodes together in the previewer in Tinderbox. And the reason I was wanting to do that specifically is the way I've been working here is I can basically highlight all the nodes that I'm working on as text, get a great big markdown dump of that in the Tinderbox editor, and then copy and paste that across to something like Marked, which will do a really nice preview and export into the other kind of editorial workflow tools I have to use to produce papers and reports. But again, it's kind of I still got this weird sense that I'm using things for the wrong reason, but they can still be used that way in a productive method. I'm going to lower my hand now. I didn't realize.
Yeah.
I-
Let me.
I
Go ahead.
wonder if
Go
we
ahead,
could
Mark.
get you to demonstrate that for this group at some point. I
Sure,
think it would
yeah.
be fun to see.
Yeah, I agree.
Not immediately, but I think that would be a really fun thing to like actually see rather than try to imagine.
Right, yeah. I think you're absolutely right there. Yes.
Okay. So, and Dave, I do have a couple of reactions or comments. So the idea of linking the URL between DEVONthink and Tinderbox is pretty cool. And I don't know if you've ever tried it, but if you drag a DEVONthink item over into Tinderbox, Tinderbox will automatically paste in the URI and keep that connected link between DEVONthink and not. I exclusively write in Markdown myself as well. So just as you've got a friend there. And on a side, at some point, if you want, I wrote my entire doctoral dissertation, 300 pages in Tinderbox and published it out of Tinderbox, including the entire linear document and all of the references. I took, and I finished my dissertation in July of this year, so it's still pretty fresh. So if you want to ping me offline, I'll happily give you some one starving academic to another, help you get through this process. Happily connect with you on that. So it doesn't sound like you're doing necessarily anything wrong. I could imagine some efficiency, especially if you wanted to start bringing your writing process more and more into Tinderbox and then take advantage of some of those things. But as Mark Bernstein said, it's pretty interesting workflow. I'd love to see it. Mr. Art.
Oh yeah, no, you pretty much covered the things that I was talking about. I had only one minor thing to add to it, is that some of us are already using Markdown and sort of working with fragments across platforms via Obsidian. And we've done a couple of, by the way, hi, Dave, and welcome to the forum. And we've been using sort of this combination of Obsidian, Markdown, and mobile and various forms of input, and dragging material directly into Tinderbox. And in listening to your description, and again, it's a lot of it depends on how accustomed one is to using or deploying an app like DEVONthink. But actually, I don't need DEVONthink at all, because I can go from just a rough fragment. In fact, sometimes I'll write a note down on paper. Quite often, I do that and take a photograph, scan it. It's now in drafts or in Obsidian, which is, again, Markdown native, and use Tinderbox's watch folder feature to see that document directly inside Tinderbox. And if I want to link multiple fragments, they can still remain in their source zone. That means as a finder folder, say under Obsidian's command, but I can juggle around with them in the watch folder simply by applying agents or sorting techniques without changing the source fragment. But yeah, just to add that.
Yeah, exciting. So Dave, I just put in the chat my email and calendar. So one academic to another, I think I can save you countless hours. So let's chat. All right, who's next? Who's got something else? When you want to help navigate us through a dialogue on how and why we use Tinderbox. So one example we've got was obviously book writing per Bruce and PhD writing per Dave. I brought up time tracking. Paul's talked about meeting autonomization. What are some of the other things you've been thinking about?
So I've been trying to figure out how to get the kind of practice with it that I want um, when I have enough time to do it. So in the past, I've mentioned that the intrigued about using it for class planning, and then I ran out of time to do everything with Tinderbox that I wanted to do. And part of the background here is I've been using Emacs since the early 80s. And you can get an awful long way on some of the use cases for what Tinderbox is good for with Emacs. They're not interchangeable. They do different things. They certainly have different strengths. But it's a powerful enough tool, and I've got enough experience with it that I know how to do what I need to do for it. And what I had posted on the forum, and maybe didn't articulate very well, is that in my particular situation, I won't say this represents anybody else, the easy projects, I have tools I'm pretty comfortable with doing. Emacs being the number one thing, but there are tools for doing outlining and things, so that's not compelling by itself. And then when you want to get complicated is when it gets interesting and complicated. And for it, and I've got this sort of relatively larger project that, again, I keep running into time constraints on. And what I was curious about is examples of projects that different people do with enough detail so it's not, I wrote my PhD thesis with it, and without, here's all of the details about everything I had to do, but that breaks down some of the components and interesting aspects of what Tinderbox was valuable for in the project. And it's some work for people to write up a response to that. But a catalog of sort of projects that in some sense one could pattern match against to say, okay, I've got something that's sort of like that. Maybe there's a sample file that someone has posted or a little tutorial on this piece of it that does not drag in a whole lot of things that I'm not interested in, would be helpful for the community and might help me. I don't know, but that's sort of what I was getting at with the forum post.
Okay. Can you start with a comment on the things that you're not interested in? And then I'm going to make another comment. Like, what do you mean by that?
So for the moment, I am not, my interest in Tinderbox is as a thinking tool, not as a document production tool. So I'm a lot less interested in export details right now. I understand I can do that, and I'm pretty sure I could figure those out if I decided I needed to export stuff for it. For the class, and I know you've done things like this for your class, Michael. I want to take I'm working on revamping it for teaching next semester, which is soon, to remix so the pieces I've got, work out the learning goals better, tie the learning goals more carefully to assignments and assessment, and what I'm doing in class. So it's atomized a lot more than I did before, which is great. And Tinderbox feels like an interesting tool for this. I may not need export, but I do want to aggregate the pieces into the things so that I know that I've got all the pieces I need for a lecture. and to publish the syllabus, which the so again, right, a lot of pieces. This seems to be what Tinderbox is good at, and conceptually, I like the idea of using Tinderbox as a thinking tool as I am working through that. But I also need to be attentive to the time it's going to take to make Tinderbox do what I want it to do in the limited time that I have before class starts.
Okay, so I've got a couple reactions as I'm hearing you talk. One, I still want to. I don't think I really. I heard two things that I felt were a bit conflicting. You know, you're saying I don't want to export, but then you said I want to be able to publish my syllabus, and those seem like the same thing to me. You know, and so and I think for me too, the export word might be a bit of a red herring for people in that. Tinder, you know, for me, I would say start looking at the use of export, aka preview, as part of your thinking process, rather whether or not you want to get your stuff out of Tinderbox or not. So as Bruce was suggesting, and reflecting on the class that I've been teaching the last few weeks, you can create templates that will help you with your thinking. So if you're not leveraging one of the existing views like table view or attribute browser view, you can pull together a fairly quick table, or much like what Art Kerm was suggesting in his point the other day. I want to be able to, and I'm going to interpret your ask earlier, Art, but he's like, Art's like, I want to be able to think, I want to be able to pull from values of attributes that I've autonomized into notes, create a table on the fly, view that table while I'm in map view, so then I can then look at that table and associate those insights I'm getting from that table with other notes and other work that I'm doing. Well, that table and as we demonstrated a couple weeks ago and on the fly in a meetup, I might add, which was kind of cool. We were able to figure out that you could simply whip together a quick HTML template, which is export code, and then using the posters function, then render that table in the map view. And there's no other purpose than to help you visualize the data in a different way, in a different context that would help you with your thinking. So export. So in other words, for me, export is not about, it's actually has very little to do with just getting stuff out. It's about formatting your content so Tinderbox provides us 6 or 7 views. Export code provides you an infinite number of views that you want to have to be able to think about your content and think about your material in the context to which you want to see it as you're working through it. And I think that's another way of looking at it, and hopefully that may help you get over the hump to start thinking about templates a little more than beyond it's just about export. Art, you wanted to make a comment maybe, or go ahead, Win.
So sure. What I'm trying to do is at the moment, in some sense, with the learning process, is to reduce the cognitive load that I have on getting done what I want, so that I can solve a problem like you suggest. Great use of it. No quarrel with that. For it. When that's the aspect of the thinking that I need to do with it.
That's where I want to go back to my original question too. Is I'm not unclear on when you say what I want. Like, so what is it that what is it that you want? Do you want to build a list? Do you want to what is it that you want? Maybe you could clarify that a little bit more. Like, provide some very specific tactical thing you want Tinderbox to do for you.
So I'm going to keep this meta for a bit, and then we can talk about those things. Because the one is that I don't know yet, because it's a creative exploration for it. I have some ideas that I want to start with for it, and in some cases, figuring out what those are just has overhead. I I don't feel like I can't do it. For it, I'm perfectly comfortable with programming and things. The matter of finding the right Tinderbox details for what I want to do and make it do what I want. So a thing that I roughly think I know how to do is I'd like to, but this is getting into the weeds. That was not what the forum post was really intended to do. And you may say it always has to be in the weeds. Maybe that's true for it. A thing I would like to do is I want to be able to rearrange the sequence of the lectures I have for it that match that automatically updates on numbering and scheduling. Numbering is pretty easy. That is sibling order and just rewriting the visible display of the notes to have the number in it. No problem. The doing the date calculations for the academic calendar, that's a little more complicated. I don't think it's insurmountable. I have to figure out how to do that for it. So if I move lecture 3 in front of lecture or after lecture 17, all of the dates get adjusted to be the right thing. And there are wacky things about the holidays, about the academic calendar, because 1 week there's a random holiday. In the middle of the semester, it's not a regular pattern. Excuse me. I would like to have status indication of, okay, I think that this class period is fully prepared, and maybe some indication of how fractionally prepared it is. I haven't gotten there yet for it. I want to be able to track knowledge prerequisites for learning goals, assignments, topics within lectures, so that I cover the prerequisite material, because I have a very weird class that's much more fragmented than usual for it. So there's some dependency management in this. So in class 4, I will talk about some stuff that class 5 will need that is otherwise unrelated to what class 4 is about. Those are some of the kinds of examples I'm thinking about, and also I know you know way more about this than I do, because you've been doing more teaching.
Yeah. Okay. All that's fair enough. I can react, but let's let Chuck.
I was going to just
Chuck, you're on. You. Oh yeah. Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. I was thinking, as Wayne was talking, I was thinking about one of the, going back several years. So technology and improvements in Tinderbox has addressed some of the issues. But I started using Tinderbox to take a bunch of notes in outline format. And I got to the point where I wanted to share those notes as a printout with some colleagues or as a PDF. And at the time, I couldn't for the life of me figure out, how do I print out these notes? And I can remember Mark Anderson saying, but you've got to use export. Oh, I'd never thought of export as being a way to print out notes. And so I throw that out as an example of how someone with minimal experience with Tinderbox starts using it in a way that it's intended to be used for, but then encounters what to them appears to be a very obvious thing and runs into a roadblock and I can't do the obvious thing. And so maybe a lot of the issues that people struggle with are related to that kind of thing, where they begin to use Tinderbox, it starts to work for them, but now then they want to do something different. And because Tinderbox is a world unto itself, sometimes those different things are not as obvious as they should be or might be. And again, my example of printing out the notes is not a good one, because Mark Bernstein has made a lot of improvements, and those kinds of things are a lot more obvious, but perhaps not as obvious as people might expect them to be. So I think that that's a common problem, and maybe one that might be worth focusing on. How do you address some of these very common things so that people can go beyond the just experimenting with it to actually doing something with it, which will get them into the iterative mode, which is where I think most Tinderbox users need to get to, which is they've done something useful. Now they've got some foundational material to work with. Now they want to do something more elaborate. Well, the incentive to do something more elaborate will be you've already got something to work with. And I think that's the iterative cycle that we try and stimulate. And Michael, you've done a tremendous amount of work on doing that. So I think maybe that's what Wynn is trying to get to, is how do we goose that activity so that people can go from just getting stuff into Tinderbox to making some further use of it, that it promotes that getting to an iterative state. Enough said.
Yeah, no, I think that's helpful. And I think going back to what Bruce said earlier in the conversation, I want to go back to Wynn, in that I think approaching Tinderbox with an organizational mindset is right out of the gate is really helpful. And I'm gonna, and I would like Paul and Kim to either support or refute what I'm about to say. But for me, what really helped me when I approached Tinderbox is when I finally realized and embraced the fact that there are generally 4 kinds of notes that I want to take and or use in Tinderbox. There is the scratch notes, which are kind of my throwaway notes. And what I found is I actually don't use Tinderbox for that. I use Obsidian now for my scratch notes, because that's where it works on my phone and I can capture them anywhere and they work. And I don't want to muddy as Paul said on Friday, Tinderbox is the place where work gets done. And I don't want to get my work in the way of like 90% of my scratch notes, because they're all over the place. And so I do that in another tool. The next tool that helps me understand Tinderbox is what I call the functional notes, because Tinderbox uses notes for a Tinderbox file to function, and so like templates and prototypes, or stamps or function libraries, those are all notes like any other cell in your body. They just happen to be specialized for a purpose. Some of them are heart cells, some of them are lung cells, some of them are blood cells. I mean, so they're notes. They just have to be, they're functional notes that Tinderbox is using for specialized purposes. So for example, a few weeks back, we learned, one of our community members was having a huge problem because his stamps stopped working. And then lo and behold, we found out that he had created a file called stamps farther up in the outline, and Tinderbox was seeing his created note named stamps and said, okay, well, I'm going to look for stamps in that folder. But Tinderbox has a functional folder it calls stamps, where it goes to look for to find stamps. So and I don't think Mark really needs to address this, but if he were to address it, until such point in time, don't name any other note in Tinderbox called stamps, because Tinderbox actually functionally uses that name. Not a big deal. Once you know it, it's fine. And there's a bunch of different technical strategies, like the use of prefixes that Bruce and I discussed earlier, that helps you with that. So scratch notes, functional notes. And then there are 2 other kinds of notes that we were talking about, and I've been talking about over the class and over the years, for that matter. And one is what I'll call our writing notes, our output notes, the stuff that we're working, our work notes, the stuff that we're working on, where we're writing and we're creating a bunch of stuff. And for me, those writing notes tend to be non-atomic. They're multi-dimensional notes. They're notes that bring in several ideas all in one place, aka they're not Nicholas Luhmann Zettels. They're not atomic notes. They're not discrete ideas that have been properly written in your own language, appropriately cited, and then referenced to other notes in your document, which then leads me to the 4th category notes for me, which I call resource notes, or what Luhmann called Zettels, which are your atomic notes that are bundled down to a discrete idea that are cited and referenced and linking to other atomic notes. And for me, what's important, the difference between, say, writing notes and the atomic notes, or what I, in my files and when I do demos, I call them I call it a resources folder, and in my resources folder I've got resources. For me, those atomic notes, those resources, are notes that I want to repurpose across different documents or across different projects or across different articles. So if I spent the time to properly curate and define a term or an industry regulation, or to curate an image file or an image note that's referencing to a file on my hard drive, I don't want to have to do that multiple times. I want to be able to do that once in an AKA Zettel in a resource note, and then be able to repurpose that idea, that note, across different writings, across different blog posts, across different projects. And so for me, that's when I really started to understand Tinderbox from that very beginning, was to realize there really are 4 different kind of categories of notes that one works with. And then if you start using the different containers and the different approaches to Tinderbox to manage those, Tinderbox starts getting a lot easier. And then you can start saying, okay, now I want to start organizing my notes, and some of these notes I will put them into containers, and other notes I'm not going to put them into containers. So, like, for example, a lot of the times, and this is what really helped me this week, and I'll happily show it if you guys are interested. To Wynn's point about getting some visual cues as to what makes things different. I identified about 200 companies in the automotive industry, and those companies are categorized into different types of companies. Some are shop management companies, some are dealer management companies, some are private equity companies. And so rather than creating this whole hierarchy, and then some of them cross boundaries, some of them are shop management companies and private equity companies. So then what do you do? So rather than coming up with some artificial hierarchy structure to manage those kinds of notes, I dump all the notes that are a company, I call them entities, into an entities folder. And then I use the attributes and then the action code of Tinderbox to then action against those notes to, 1, later help me go discover those with agents, but 2, immediately give me visual cues to understand how this note differs from that note. And then, and I just thought about it. I haven't had a use for Gaudi view yet, but now that I've done this project over the last day and a half, this is going to be a perfect example of using Gaudi view. How do I have all of my, out of these 200 or so companies, let's use the Gaudi view to get all the shop management companies visually together. I'm going to try that right after this call, because that was my first try to use that. So I think approaching Tinderbox with that kind of basic understanding is really helpful. So let me shut up and see Kim, Paul, Bruce, could you say that more clearly, or say it, articulate it in a different way that works for you? Or someone else talk. Tim, you want to contribute, Bruce, or no, or should I give an example of that?
I mean, I think you look at notes, scratch notes, function notes. I mean, I'm looking at the Zettelkasten and concepts where you have the fleety notes, kind of looking at what you're trying to adopt. I'm trying to do the same thing, but and Tinderbox allows me to do that in some respects and create those permanent notes, right? That you're trying to actually create new types of knowledge. So I sort of see that from what I'm thinking and what you're thinking, we're kind of similar in some respects. But how to do it within a Tinderbox, that's of course will be kind of the challenge and the learning process of how to do that. If you want to create it and you study it, you really have to do it. You got to get in there in Tinderbox to learn. For example, right now I'm creating agents, which I'll call my fleeting notes. Well, I probably should create like an agent concept of a folder and set that up. And so, I see what you're going with it. And so you talk about scratch notes, functional notes, research notes. What else? And you had one more. I forget which one was that.
Well, I call them scratch notes, my writing notes, my permanent, what you refer to as permanent notes, I refer to as resource notes, and then the functional notes.
Functional, okay.
Yeah, and again, those are notes that Tinderbox uses to function. Templates and stamps and literally functions, and buckets of action code, etc.
Exactly. So I would say one thing, one of the challenges I would think, and I think you mentioned this too, is Michael, when you actually create these notes, and with Lumen, how he did it with his indexing concepts, how would you index that within a Tinderbox solution? How would you actually you take your fleeting notes and you keep with the ones that you want for your research, you tie them into a reference note, whatever. How would you actually index that and tie them in, link them together, linking your thinking, I guess you'd say, within Tinderbox? And that's one thing I'll definitely sponge your brain next time we meet with our one-on-one. But that's one thing I like to talk about eventually, how to link your notes.
Well, and again, if we go back to I'd encourage you, even going back as far as 2 years ago, or even 2.5 years ago now,
sure.
Look at some of our past Tinderbox trainings on linking, because it hasn't really changed. And I think where people really get hung up on the Lumen process is Lumen created a unique, discrete ID number for every note.
Exactly.
And then he would manually copy that between notes. Well, guess what? Tinderbox has a unique ID number. It's called ID. It's an ID attribute, and it's unique to every note. And so you can leverage and use that. Now, and so then when you're linking notes, you can link notes and leverage that ID number for uniqueness. And you can link notes and have that ID number get associated with the other notes if you want to do that. Now, there's some more advanced things you can do, and this is one of the things that I've really learned about Tinderbox, especially when you think about that permanent node or resource node idea. When you copy notes between Tinderbox files, that unique ID number changes, because every note in a Tinderbox file is unique, and it's as designed, and it's what you want it to do. However, if you spend a lot of time curating your own unique, your own Zettel, if you will, your own permanent note, your own resource note, call it whatever you want to call it. And you want to be able to then easily copy. And then let's say you have multiple writings, and in your writings, you've made, like what I do, for example, images. When I make a reference to an image in a document, and I want to say include image 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? And if I copy that image over to another note, and I copy and then I happen to copy a part of my writing into that other Tinderbox file, I want that writing and that image still to be linked. So in that note, I just use Tinderbox action code to generate my own permanent ID. I called it Becker ID, for lack of a better term. And I say, hey, Tinderbox, take a random string of characters and the ID number, stick those together. And if Becker ID it has a property in it, never overwrite that. And now I have a permanent ID that I can leverage to copy. I can now copy my image files across any Tinderbox file I'm going to use, and they'll always work in my writings because that ID number is never going to change. And so there's things like that that you can do. Well, I actually have. I did it a few weeks ago, but I can do it again. And so there's things like that you can learn to adopt. And I think this is one, going back to that point of Home Depot comment I made earlier. Tinderbox is a toolbox, and you can use these tools in any which way you want that works for you. And depending on your skill set, you can build an outhouse or you can build a mansion. But they're all the same tools. And as you evolve and iterate your model, and the other thing to think about it too, as a toolbox, it's your workflow. It's your workflow. And so often, unlike say Microsoft Word, where it says to do this, to get this done, to create a list, press this button. Tinderbox says, you can create a list in any number of different ways. It depends on your workflow and how you want to do it and how you think. And with a tool like Tinderbox, with great power comes great responsibility. You need to be responsible for how you're going to use the tool, and that's and then once you kind of grok that and get it, it's incredibly empowering. And I'm happy to show any of this kind of stuff. But if it helps, I can actually show. Let's pause there, but I can actually show some of that visual treatment that both for the linking that you were discussing and the visuals that Win is looking for, and I can demonstrate how that kind of comes together pretty quickly if you're interested. But and again, I think that helps with the thinking process. But before we go down that path, let's somebody else talk. Anybody else have another comment? Chuck, you're always thoughtful with your reactions. Nothing?
I was going to offer perspective.
Please.
So in my case, I'm not an academic. I have some academic degrees, but the extent that I use those is questionable. But I do chair a bunch of nonprofit boards. And so on any given month, I attend and chair probably a dozen to 15 meetings. And for most people who attend meetings, raise your hand if you agree with this, the entire output of a meeting is a Word document that everyone shares and is very satisfied with. And my frustration is those Word documents offer absolutely no insight into the real product of the meeting. So what I've done is I've used Tinderbox extensively to create meeting notes, outlines, eventual output by publishing things that link together the ideas and allow me to rank and order the output of meetings that move the process along a little bit faster. So I do this very simply. I take an outline while I'm in a meeting using Tindernote or Tinderbox. I move those rows around to create the hierarchy that's necessary. I take a look at it in chart view to see if I have captured the understanding properly. I'm a big user of all the views within Tinderbox to kind of make sure that I'm catching the hierarchies and the meeting points correctly. And then my output is I output that outline or maybe a view of that outline to the group, and it moves the process of thinking together along a lot faster than sending someone a highly structured, formatted Word document.
Yeah, completely. I get it. I agree with you. I think that's the way, that's the power of Tinderbox. I mean, the problem I have, like with PowerPoint files, for instance, is all of this knowledge gets locked into that PowerPoint file or into a table in PowerPoint. And then it was great for that moment while you were thinking about it, but then it becomes stuck there and it just starts to rot. And autonomizing that into a Tinderbox file so that you then can repurpose that insights on the fly into different formats on the fly, I find very powerful. Yeah, Art.
Yeah, so I actually, this conversation is bringing up something, and that's something I run into a lot, which I think let's term it as the magic moment for the time being, which is you start on a project or you start on a meeting, and they typically, or you get an idea, and typically come to you in fragments, and they're on paper, they're a Word document, you're in a meeting scenario, or someone hands you a bunch of text files or any other format of file. So if let's assume that your primary thinking and eventually your primary output environment is Tinderbox, the question arises as to what is that magic moment? When do you pull it all in? Now, typically, in my case, I don't really work on the same things all the time. I don't have sort of a standard format. I don't have a standard magic moment because everything I work on is sort of different, and it comes to being, at different times. It takes some of them have a longer envelope, and I think to some extent, Obsidian has helped me in that respect because the notes are raw but easily cataloged and easily searched. And at a certain point, I can then dump them into a watch folder and then suck them all into Tinderbox, and they are part of the Tinderbox sort of world, and I can operate on them and create attributes, etc., etc. But I'm sure that this moment is different for everybody and for every different type of project. It's just an interesting point.
Well, and on that note too, I think as a tool for thought, again, I just reflecting on my own experience this week. I went into a meeting, into a domain I honestly know very little about, and was in a room with domain experts. And so I was able to spend 2 days in that room, keeping my mouth shut most of the time, and listening and interpreting and watching, them pull together, a 12-page PowerPoint file that talked about the companies in the industry, and talked about use cases in the industry, talked about products, all that, and then leaving that meeting and then using Tinderbox to then essentially render the whale is another terminology I like to use. You just start pulling apart, getting all the oil, getting all the blood, getting all the fats, getting all the pieces out, and then trusting the process. Like, as I'm going through that, saying, I have no idea what an SMS shop management system is. I have no idea what a dealer manage. I don't know what any of these things are, but I know they're categorically mean something. So I'm going to start sticking them into Zettel-like, permanent note-like categories. Also trusting the Tinderbox process that knows that as my thinking evolves, I can change them. I can rename them. I can, to the point Bruce made earlier, if I want to change my prefix, I can change 100 notes all at once, right? And I can trust this process, so I can let my thinking evolve as I'm rendering this whale and deconstructing it into its atomic parts. And then in about a day and a half, I got a really solid understanding of what's going on in the aftermarket automotive repair industry. And I don't know how, and some actionable things that I can take from that. And again, if people want to see examples of the file, I'll happily show it, because I think it would also help to visualize some of the the prioritization insights that can come out of this kind of thinking. But
I support
I
your. Sorry, no.
go ahead. No, please. No, please.
Yeah. Okay, I support your perspective, wholeheartedly, and also, though, I would argue that your muscle memory in terms of grabbing an incoming thought, or a lecture by somebody else, and translating that into, oh, this is the tool, or this is the pathway, the channel I would use into Tinderbox with it, is incredibly rapid compared to maybe some other users or new users of Tinderbox. And so again, I'm not really debating anything. I'm just kind of thinking aloud as to these all interesting questions, and how exactly do you get a handle? And by the way, I like Render the Whale. I've never heard it. Is it something that you grabbed, or did you?
It's probably something I made up along the way. I've used it for decades. I don't know where I got it, but I call it rendering the whale. And it's a sales term tool. Like, you spend so much time. I think that's where it comes from. It's a sales term. You go capture the whale as a sales guy. So you brought in a huge client, and you pulled this huge client up on the deck. And where it really pains the sales guy is then you sit there and watch your sales team and your post-sales team not properly render the whale, and you just watch it rot. And you're like, there's millions of dollars of potential upsell here. There's millions of dollars of opportunity and resale and assets that we could be pulling out of this whale, and you're just letting it rot. And that's where I've learned to render the whale, like start rendering it as quickly as possible so it doesn't rot.
That's hilarious. I love it. You should probably coin it in one of your next upcoming books.
Okay. Yeah, maybe that is a good title for a sales book, Rendering the Whale. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, but that's where that comes from.
Killing the whale, but
yeah. Yeah, maybe there's another more eco-friendly analysis that one can do, but but the nice thing in digital is that nothing actually does. It's like energy; nothing dies; it just gets repurposed.
Again, there you go. And that's another thing. And also Tinderbox, everything is repurposed. All my stuff in Tinderbox is constantly repurposed. I can, in fact, take a document that I've been working on for 2 years and go, okay, I'm just going to literally pull the ripcord and reorganize everything on it. And because the discrete components are constant, and my attribute values have generated more credibility or more solidity over time, it's very flexible to that edit.
Yeah. Well, and on that note, this goes back to another point I think is really important for us to grok with this as well. Use the tool to the extent and the best that you can. Again, the average user is not going to do it in a day and a half what I did, because I've got literally at this point years of practice of doing it, and I spend 90% of my day in Tinderbox. But it's certainly going to be faster for anyone else, and then leveraging the community, you can certainly get up to speed faster than I did some of this stuff, because the community wasn't doing this kind of conversation when I was getting started. But most certainly, I think these things, and with like the classes that I've been teaching, and we found ways to teach Tinderbox and get people up and running with it quicker and faster. But to Wynn's point too, I think it's really critical that we as a community, and to Chuck's point, we as a community try to find some form of Rosetta Stone to translate some of these ideas, like printing means export, or export means printing, or this, a flag or a badge can be a visual cue and an outline that helps you interpret what this note means. And so is there some kind of Rosetta Stone of capability that we can bring to bear that would help people learn, grok some of these ideas and the values of them? I think it would be really, really helpful.
I would almost go against that, because especially for the way my brain works. So quite often, for example, if I start using flags, after a while, my mind gets inured to the freshness of the flag. And so I might want to switch things up. And Tinderbox is great in that respect. I may go, okay, now I'm going to use colors on this project just so that I can, freshen and see, oh, this is a way I can highlight or prioritize something. It's
Yeah,
almost like
absolutely.
not seeking systems, if that makes sense.
Well, the nice thing with Tinderbox is you can do both, honestly. And to your point, you can mention that re-render. Okay. So I like that point that that's the other comment I wanted to make. I want to go back to what Win had said earlier. I want to be able to create notes that relate to my lectures. I want to be able to link my notes to learning objectives. I then want to be able to, if I start reordering my learning at my lectures, I want to make sure that the learning objectives get somehow visually cued so that I know that this one needs, I need to, this needs to go there. And so we can talk about how that might work. And then there's the whole point on dates. And what cropped into my head when is I too am struggling, honestly, with the dates idea, especially with academic calendars. Like, what do you do when there's a holiday? What do you do when there's a day off? Like, what do you do when you skipped a class in real time? Um, and I've honestly found it now, and then this goes back to Bruce's point too. Like, how do you get your stuff into a Word document or into a Google Drive document when you don't necessarily have the facilities to render the perfect pandoc command line, blah blah blah, or the perfect template to do it right. And one thing I've really learned with Tinderbox along the way, and I especially learned this while I was completing my doctorate, Dave. So we can certainly give you some great learnings on this. At some point too, trust yourself and trust the process and trust the tools. And when you need to get the job done, just get it done. So in the context of like the date issue, I found it often really helpful for myself to just realize, well, I've only got 20 dates in this class. And so I'm going to first deal with the ordering of my tool. And then if I have to manually type in the dates once I've got this stuffed out, I will. And then to your point, when at some point, hopefully when I get around to the time, I'll come up with some algorithmic approach to manage dates for my class, but it's just too complex for right now. So I'm not going to worry about it.
Well, and Mark dropped a comment in the chat. I'm just suggesting making a list of them that then you can dereference by the class
Correct.
number.
Yes, that's a great
which is
idea.
a fine solution for it, for that particular problem.
That's actually a really good one. I'm going to steal
yes.
that one, Mark, for my spring class. That's a great idea. Here are the list of the dates that I'm using. They're
Right.
date notes that I then can reference to these lectures. That's fantastic.
Or we can share a bit of action code that, given the basic structure of the class schedule, generates the initial list, and then you just have to fix it.
Correct.
It's a little bit lazier way to do it.
Yeah. The
Correct.
big point there is that dates are really persnickety if you need to
Yes.
program them, especially academic calendar dates, which are full of local customs that are hard to write correctly, but actually very easy to look up on your calendar. And if you've got a 14-week semester, you're meeting twice a week, that's only 28 dates. You can just do one a minute and you're done in half an hour.
And
Well,
we've got an exception.
I tried to automate the handling of I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, just in the weird exception category. So my academic calendar for the coming semester, I'm teaching Mondays and Wednesdays, except that there is a Tuesday that is designated to run on the Monday schedule.
Yes.
Right. And that's what just stung me in the butt.
Meetings for across the campus.
And just what stung me in the butt last week for the class that I'm teaching is my students had to remind me that Monday's classes actually Wednesday classes that teach Monday, Wednesday don't actually hold the final on Monday or Wednesday of that week. They hold it on the Thursday of that week in the afternoon. And I had, as an adjunct professor, I had no idea. No one bothered. None of the administration never told me that that's how that was handled. So there's another great arcane academic example that totally screwed me up and I had to go address. And then from the automation, that would be hard. But to your point, Mark, it's only 20 days. So write 20 notes. It's fairly manageable to do. Okay, so we got about 15 minutes left. If it would be helpful, because we've been talking a lot of theoretical, not visually looking at this stuff. If it would be helpful, I can show you the file that I've been working on this last couple days, and to demonstrate how I rendered a 13-page PowerPoint file into. Let's see, how many notes do I have in this file now?
I want to just enter. Mark Berstein had offered to give that talk that was going to.
Oh
be
yeah. Let's do it.
Minutes.
Let's do it. Mark, are you ready?
I don't want to hijack the meeting, but I'd be kind of excited about that, Mark. Ever since
me too. I forgot.
Though, we have enough time for Mark.
No, there is. Let's have Mark do his thing, and then if you guys want to stay over, I'll spend 10 minutes and show you mine when we're done. So, Mark, it's all yours.
Let's see. So, with luck, you can now see the slide. Am I sharing the right thing? Okay.
Yes.
Looks like it.
Hooray. So, this is for a 24-hour marathon conference that's mostly remote, but also being held in a 13th century refectory in the middle of Paris. And this is going to be next Tuesday. And I start from this piece of Gaudi view and explain a little bit about what I do, which is making tools for writers and visualizing emergent relationships. And the way, as you know, this tool is about trying to get a lot of notes on the screen at one time while the notes retain their individual appearance and identity and properties, and you can tell them apart. And also potentially to be open to locally non-Euclidean spaces like hyperbolic spaces. And that's inspired by stuff like the roofs of Antoni Gaudi, who had a similar problem. He, for reasons of his own, wanted hyperbolic geometries on roofs, but roofs have to be tiled in the Mediterranean or they leak. But the underlying mathematics was worked out at the very beginning of the 20th century. Good algorithms were developed in the 1980s. All of this is lying around. But people in the software world do not do a whole lot of this or interfaces like this, which again is a century old. And so my point in this talk is to examine our dialogues with machines in light of other global dialogues. I think this sort of dialogue this sort of conversation can clarify what we hope to learn from AI and why AI is interesting. Speaking of images, the key image for modern globalism is, of course, the globe seen from the moon. It's one thing to know that, in principle, one could stand outside creation and look at it, but it's another thing to actually do it. And the other key experience of AI goes back to Vienna in the 1930s and the understanding that our mind, which is at least bicameral and really we should think of as multicameral, is never going to be able to know exactly what the other parts of it are going to do at any given moment, much less what anyone else is going to do at any given moment. It's not just that we don't know, we can't in general know. And that realization is the foundation, also the curse, but the foundation of computer science and also of the experience of developing software, the nuts and bolts world in which I spend most of my time. In practice, we're particularly bad at understanding ourselves. And other things that are abstract, like numbers. Writing begins in the city of Uruk because it's really hard to do accounting in your head, especially when you start having big numbers, which state-run tax systems tend to do. I want to skip forward to another meeting that might have triggered off the Enlightenment when an important and influential philosopher kicked off a prolonged inquiry into the natural rights of men and women. That American intellectual was a chap named Kandiaronk, who was Secretary of State or Speaker of the Wendat tribe, who at that time lived north of the Great Lakes. He was an orator and a traveler. There's a chance he actually got to the court of Louis XIV. He was fascinated throughout his life by Europeans and astounded by their odd and backward ways. One of his principal astonishments was that nearly every European, in his experience, was always taking orders from superiors nearly all the time. This seemed to him to be utterly intolerable, and why would anyone choose to live that way? In fact, the society of the Eastern Woodlands didn't do that, and they had deliberately built their world so one didn't have to. Their ancestors had taken lots of orders as part of the Mississippian society centered on Cahokia. This is Mount Ayat Etowah in Georgia, which is about 800 miles from Cahokia. Those fellows knew how to project power, and they sure gave orders. But by 1400, Cahokia was gone, and many of the successor societies were very carefully constructed to resist becoming states. Something similar seems to have happened a little earlier in the American Southwest with the end of Chaco and Mimbres and the coming of the Kachinas. Again, a successor society was intentionally structured against the emergence of royal power because people had tried that and it hadn't ended well. Kandiaronk's impact was multiplied because his people were the first new neighbors that Europe had encountered for quite a while. Europe thought it knew what Persian and Araby had to say, and it hadn't yet learned to understand what East and South Asia were about to tell it. Another part of Mississippian society was the expectation that just about everyone, at least all males, ought to contribute to intellectual life and that public intellectuals mattered. Of course, this is just the time when coffee houses in London and cafes in Vienna began and then caught on. That was a core part of the Mississippian resistance to the state. Government by consensus where possible, and where consensus turned out not to be possible, government built on the consent of the governed. And this is where computers get back into the story, because that Wendat idea of community governments through sober public discussion proved really attractive a couple of hundred years later in Europe, especially so among the emancipated and assimilated Jews who were being driven from village life throughout Eastern Europe and who for a time flocked to Vienna and other big cities. And it was in Vienna, in a coffee house, that Gödel, von Neumann, and Carnot, a group of mathematically inclined philosophers known as the Vienna Circle, came up with the foundations of computer science. These discussions tended to be held in cafes. They tended to be open to a remarkable range of disciplines. For example, a frequent contributor was the architect Josef Frank, as they had physicists, they had psychologists, they had people who were involved in inventing infographics. These were also the driving spirits of the city's socialist government, which for 15 years built a remarkable amount of Vienna and is now remembered as Red Vienna. They built a principled resistance to totalizing schemes that was particularly recognized as being Viennese, certainly Stalinism and Nazism, but also to the totalizing theory of the Bauhaus. Instead, they invented and applied what we would now call user-centered design. But this central point behind Gödel and the rest was to imagine hypothetical machines and how we might reason about what a hypothetical machine could and couldn't do. The point isn't that they wanted to build these machines. They didn't. It didn't occur to them until much later and then in the middle of a war that anyone would ever want to build the machines. These were things to reason about. From that imagined encounter comes computer science. But the socialists eventually lost an election and everything came to an end right quick. But those few years were enough to establish that you could do logic without God, and that people, like any machine, can only do so much. We may be noble in reason, but there are things that are true that we just can't prove. For a time, these people, almost all of them came from somewhere else, met and argued and proved this unexpected and disturbing result. This is important. No one expected computation to be undecidable, but it is. It was an opportunity to hear a new thing. And this leads to the subject of a book I'm trying to write, which is how do we think about machines that make us better? And how might machines make us better? Probably not by beating us at chess, certainly not by preaching. And I don't think by writing our homework for us, though it might be nice if our slaves of steel would wash the dishes and do the laundry. But what we chiefly need right now is to see ourselves more clearly. And so with AI, we meet again a new voice, but it's that oldest trick of modernism. We're meeting ourselves, refracted, slant. The problem with AI today is that there's plenty of space for tricks here and delusions. We have every reason to mistrust the charlatans. And there are plenty of ways to fool ourselves along the way. But the interesting thing isn't the champagne or even the girl. The interesting thing is the reflection. And so we return to our many notes. Facts and ideas and relations among the notes are the way we make meaning. For 5,000 years since that clever fellow at Uruk discovered writing in clay as a protection against contractual fraud, we have been writing our thoughts down so we could see our thinking outside ourselves. That is what large language models do. It's really all they do, but that's not nothing. So that's what I think is interesting about AI. It's a new chance to see our reflection. Recent politics, over which the memory of the 1930s looms, suggests that we see this, what we see in this mirror may not please us. Still, it is an opportunity to know ourselves, and perhaps somehow something of importance may yet be attempted. That's it. But thanks for putting up with that. Where are we? Okay.
And you did it with 30 seconds to spare. Perfect.
Yay.
Nicely done.
Yeah, it's
Nicely
superb
done.
and fascinating. I'm gonna have to look into each and every one of these references and people and Great.
Yeah, and some of this is discussed in the paper. Draft paper that I posted in the chat, and any comments and corrections there are more than welcome.
And Mark, can you comment a bit about this whole this idea of pattern matching when it comes to like AI and the thinking and learning that we're getting? Because it's that idea of, are we really seeing the truth for what it is, or are we seeing the patterns that are coming out of it that are in the mirror? I mean, maybe I'm not clear with my question, but
Well, things like ChatGPT are not reasoning. They know a lot about what one tends, once one starts saying something, what's likely to come next. And of course, we've all been playing with that in the predictive text at the bottom of our phone messaging for a couple of years. The large language models have gotten very good at it. So it's quite easy to get scenarios where they seem to almost pass the Turing test. They can create writing, which is actually quite tricky, for example, for college instructors to distinguish from bad student writing. You can, if you're engaged in dialogue with them, you can usually find things that they'll say that no person would say. But they are interesting in that there aren't many opportunities to talk to something that isn't human. And it's only learned from human speech, but still, it's not quite us.
interesting. Anybody else have any other thoughts, comments, questions?
I've been playing around increasingly with elements of AI. Using Anthropic. Just recently, Gemini Advanced. And where I find that it is most valuable is when I have a fairly voluminous amount of information that I need to structure and organize differently. That it seems to do flawlessly. When it comes to summarizing, it actually does a better job than I thought, but you can find little glitches. And the glitches are usually falsehoods that are positively stated. That's what I've noticed. That it tends to be optimistically wrong, and so I'm trying to find that line. And Mark, I put a post because I'm getting a surprisingly increasingly number of requests from psychologists who want to be able to use AI to summarize their sessions. And that entire, the whole question is, well, how can it do it without recording the session? What happens to the data? That's considered somewhat sacrosanct in terms of more than somewhat. And so, it really, it feels so premature to me. And yet, when I go to these conferences, though I've been to 2 in the last 6 months, these companies are all over the place now offering to do this. So I think the more that we explore this, I've tried to use Tinderbox for writing some of my progress notes. And I know you have an old time example from a psychiatrist on there, and it's absolutely useful to do. There's no question about it. So this is, anyway, those are my thoughts.
Nice. Art.
Yeah, I'm actually really sort of increasingly interested in the probably largely behind the scenes proprietary nature of the technologies that are being deployed for building out AI and LLM methodologies. And was also very fascinated when I was in China this time. It's like it's a world that exists, that runs very efficiently without Google. They use a lot of iPhones, interestingly, because a lot of Android is denied to them simply because you can't even receive emails on your Gmail account if you're in China unless you're using a VPN. And no Chinese citizen is going to use a VPN because it's sort of not it's frowned on. And so it's an interesting concept. There are companies like Huawei that are developing technologies that are completely independent from what the Western world are doing. And if you look at, ultimately, you look at these societies that talk about, being without top-down instruction systems, I think there's a huge question in there that deserves exploration. I don't know by whom, but what are all these technologies? Who's running them? Who ultimately owns the data? And what is it going to serve? The individual, the society, someone above us, the new governments who are increasingly tech competent. So I don't know. It's a lot of thought.
Fantastic. All right, Win.
So a couple of thoughts on AI related things. One that I think that Mark was getting close to but didn't quite say, so I'm curious about your reaction on it, is one of the things that I'm concerned about, especially when I think about the way that I see some students using it, but also the way that some organizations are deploying AI, is that in a lot of areas, AI can do almost everything you want a junior employee to do. So you don't need the junior employee, except the only way you get experienced senior people is from them going through the learning process of doing that. So one, Mark, I'm curious about your interest in this. The other is that leads you just the general concern that in 5 years or 10 years, we'll suddenly realize that we don't have people who know things or have the necessary experience to do novel things because we never taught them how. We never taught the younger generation how.
Reaction to that, well, that's partly what David Eddy had been talking about quite a bit, in that we're not able to maintain, we won't be able to maintain the stuff that we're building. And Isaac Asimov talked about that in the Foundation series quite a bit, that the foundation started falling apart when society no longer could repair the hover elevators and all of the stuff that we built, because we forgot, we weren't training the people to do it. I think it's going to be a big problem.
Arguably, a lot of the infrastructure in the US is, apparently the US Civil Engineer Society has given it a D rating because so many bridges and roads, etc., are not being maintained or built up to the standards. Again, I'm going to pull up China because what they're doing with their roads, freeways, vehicles, the infrastructure, the railway stations is stunning. It's mind-boggling. They're really putting together a cohesive and powerful society. That actually, they copy from each other constantly. This whole idea of intellectual supremacy and owning ideas, IP, is looked at very differently over there. It's all shared between people.
Well, that goes back to what the famous quote between Wozniak and Brandt in 1983 at the first hackers conference, where Wozniak was arguing that information wants to be free, and Brandt was arguing that information also wants to be expensive, meaning those that are creating the applications want to control the information so they can monetize it. And Wozniak says, but the only way to have growth is to let the information be free.
Yeah, so I guess eternal conundrum, isn't it?
Yeah. Interesting.
I don't think we need to spend too much time worried that AI will de-skill us, at least not on the decade time scale. Because, yeah, if we find out that people don't know stuff, then, well, people will learn stuff, and it will only be slightly harder in 10 years than it would be to have started now. Tom Shippey, I believe it was, is the successor to Tolkien in that chair of Anglo-Saxon philology, and makes the point that he is by no means the linguist that Tolkien was, no one alive today has that kind of language mastery because we don't do that anymore. Then again, we know lots of stuff that he didn't need to know because no one knew it. So we're always gaining and losing, and we're always adjusting, and the AI distortions will be something that we accommodate there. What is tricky is that it's quite easy for us to imagine that, imagine benign uses that are kind of handy, like automatic moderation of hate speech, and not think about things that we aren't used to thinking about. Like if you can detect hate speech, who else might want to detect hate speech? People who want to promote it, people who want to fund the people who are best at hate speech. And that kind of naive reasoning about the applications of AI and adjacent technologies, we've been quite guilty of over the last decade. There's no point in talking about that to a 24-hour marathon of globalization people. But the web science paper can be viewed in one sense as a continuation of my sermon on villainy. And well, we're over time, badly
We
over
are.
time. Sorry about that.
No, it's awesome. Hey, Mark, can while you were talking, I did play with Gaudi View. Can I show you one thing and maybe you can help me
Sure.
before you leave? Just to do it real quick,
Yeah.
and then, all right. Let me show you. So for those that are interested, and I actually have a legit problem here, or not problem, just question. So, so as I was saying, I've been organizing that file that I was doing, and so this is like a perfect example. I've got all of these different companies that are ranked in different priorities, and so I popped, and then for Kim, if you're still on, Kim, you'll note the way essentially the methodology that I've been using is if I associate a company with like a type, like dealership group or automated data broker, that that type is actually, so the way I'm organized my data, as I said, I don't necessarily care about the individual company until I do. I care about the type first. So these are the types of companies we're prioritizing, and then these are the kind of companies we're not prioritizing. And so then what I've done is I've written in my action code, I've basically said, go get from your inbound links, go get the priority rank from the type. And so then that's letting me enter my companies and then have the linking all Lumen give me the priority that I want. And so if I go change the priority of the type, all of those companies will get priorities will get changed, which is pretty cool. And then popping into Gaudi View, I was able to start doing this, where I told it just to say, basically bring the types together. And so my question for you, Mark, is there a way easily when I'm looking at this to say, well, I mean, immediately I'm saying, okay, there's a lot more green than there is pink. But is there a way that we can expand if we wanted to drill in on this to make that viewer so I could actually go start seeing the companies here, or does our capability of Gaudi View kind of stop at this point?
Well, you can increase the view size, which will help. And the green is just too squished, but you see the purple is actually getting to be closer to being acceptable.
Yeah.
I'm actually quite happy that it's not just blowing up, which until recently a Gaudi view this big and in which everything is attracting something would just have had terrible trouble.
Having not played with the Gaudi view, what am I actually looking at?
So for example, look at this. So if I get rid of the query, actually, let me close this and I'll go back here. So let's say I'm in my notes and I'm like, I want to go interrogate and look at these 181 companies and try to get a sense of how they're connected. So I'm gonna open up this in a new tab. And I'm now going to go and view this in Gaudi view. And so this shows me all of the different companies and kind of where they're kind of all over the place. But now I want to get it, just like I was in outline view, the priority ones aren't glummed together. So I'm not getting the sense of scale, like how many are in their respective buckets. So if I go in here and then I type that back in, take the rank priority of a quote unquote this note with the rank priority of that note, what that's telling Gaudi is to move the notes that are of like priority together. And that's what it's doing. And so you'll slowly see it start inching these notes, like this pink one eventually is going to come down into here, and you'll get the notes linking together. And
Interesting.
then that gives you this view. So I can so for me, for when I go show my client this, I'm like, okay, the two big buckets for us are the green ones and the pink ones, which are essentially shop management companies and dealer management companies. And then I can click on a note and to kind of get a sense of what are some of these details.
I suppose you
much
can
more.
also factor in
Yeah.
attributes like location or specific markets and things like that that make it more pertinent and then can influence your prioritization system, isn't it?
Yeah. So it's just good to the point of tools for thought. It's just a really quick way to like, okay, the green stuff's is what I gotta be spending. In this context, my rank priority. This is clearly the area that I need to focus.
Thanks.
Yeah. All right.
Thanks, Michael. Good stuff.
Yeah, but that, so I started 2 days ago with a blank Tinderbox file, and it now has over 1,200 notes with 187 companies prioritized across 15 different categories, and was able
Yikes.
to, and then I was really incredible that we're able to do this.
You always like to do things on such small scale, right?
Yeah, it's got to get done. All right. Hey, everybody. Well, this was super fun. Thank you much. And congrats on your paper, Mark. That was interesting. Appreciate it.
Thanks. Bye all.
See everybody. Bye.